Okay, look, I'm uncomfortable talking about this, but we have to do it. The internet's reaction to the killing of a CEO in New York has been really surprising. There's the memes, there's the lookalike contests. Today on the show, I want to slow down a minute and look at the internet's reaction and what it tells us about this moment right now. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, we have a lot to dissect here. Since the police pictures of the suspect first came out, so many memes were just like about his good looks. You had people celebrating the killing, rooting for him to evade the police. And then this weekend, a small group of people gathered for a lookalike contest in New York. You know, the same way that they did for like a Timothée Chalamet lookalike contest. Have a listen.
Contestant number 7. Woo! And contestant number 8.
Yeah. I mean, I am the guy. So.
It is the guy.
It's him. It's really him. Yeah. How you doing?
All right, so the FBI can come out now.
Got him.
You hear that, right? Like it's the memification of a murder sort of spilling into real life. Now, as you probably have heard by now, police have charged a 26-year-old named Luigi Mangione, who was found with a handwritten manifesto criticizing healthcare companies for putting profits above care. Miles Klee and Rebecca Jennings have been thinking about the internet's reaction to the killing and also what changed yesterday with the arrest. They're here with me now. Miles, Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here.
I'm glad that you guys are here. Look, Miles, for anyone who isn't extremely online, and they do exist, they're out there. I think we maybe need to begin with a description of some of the memes that we've seen to just get a sense of the internet's reaction to the kind of the initial killing. So let's park the arrest for a moment. We'll come back to that in just a second. But when it first happened, what did you see in terms of the online reaction?
Yeah, the initial reaction I would describe as just sheer contempt. You saw a lot of jokes about, someone's claim being denied, no prior authorization for thoughts and prayers, asking if the victim had a pre-existing condition, all language
health insurance
that was
jokes, right? Like
centered around, exactly, around the nightmare of U.S. for-profit health insurance. And then you started to get some more elaborate memes where, it would say like claim denied, like over like a still image of the shooter from the security camera. And it just kind of snowballed from there.
That photo, once the photo sort of dropped, the number of memes became very photo specific. Like I think the memes that I saw had like little like heart eyes over the pictures of the shooter. Miles, I would say the tone has changed a little bit since yesterday afternoon, which is like when we learned who the suspect who's been arrested is, and then what they've been charged with. So do you want to talk a little bit about the tone and how it shifted online?
Yeah, well, the internet is really good at projecting, a fantasy and filling in details where we don't have them. Now that we have a suspect in custody, I feel that it's going to get a lot more complicated, a lot more murky. We don't actually totally understand his ideology and politics, I think, because they're a little bit incoherent from what we've seen on his like social media footprint. So I think some of the fun that people were having about imagining him as this, this vigilante who was taking on this healthcare system, that's gonna go away like the more we learn about him, and the more, frankly, realizing that he's a real person who has had some, potentially like really horrible experiences that led him to this moment. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if the memes kind of die down at this point, especially as we head towards a potentially really fraught trial.
I want to hold on that for just a moment because I think it's valuable to point out that like there was sort of a vacuum for a week, for just a little under a week, which is the vacuum of there is a partial image and then there's no other detail, which is why it was so easy to fill in, as you said, the internet is so good at sort of filling in those projections and just kind of offering projections onto that image. Now that people are sort of have a name to attach all of these ideas to, they've been digging into the internet history. They've been sort of trying to maybe glean some kind of coherent political ideology, which like there doesn't necessarily seem to be one. But also, I was 26 once, and I'm not sure that I was, politically coherent at the time. So I just wanted to say, just wanted to sort of acknowledge that. And now, Rebecca, I want to go back to the initial reaction. I think I was really surprised about the way that it unfolded, and I don't think I'm the only one on this. I just want to get specific for a moment. The photos of the suspect with like pink Hello Kitty hearts. Also, someone made this TikTok video.
give it all that I got. La-di-da-di-da, la-di-da-di-dee. Suddenly you call my name and I lose my brain and I float up to the moon. La-di-da.
So you're trying to imagine the idea of like the images of the suspect mixed in with a song about sort of like longing for the love of that person. That's one of like thousands of TikToks made by people sort of responding to the shooting. If you can bear with me, I'm going to read some of the comments on this, you know, like anything from the reference to the Britney Spears song, I'm in love with a criminal, to hopes and prayers. I bet being on the run is so stressful. Hope he's safe and healthy. You know, people saying he looks like Jake Gyllenhaal. He's dead ass so hot. Rebecca, when you look at all that reaction and the intensity of that reaction, what strikes you about that reaction?
What strikes me is that I'm shocked at how not shocking it is, I guess, like as someone who kind of lives online. I think like, especially the way that we've been able to kind of create like thirst edits and fan edits of things that are like objectively really dark and really complicated. But this is just the way the internet like processes this kind of thing. Like, and I think that when you see an image of like a man who might be handsome that you can, like Miles said, like project all of your fantasies of like a leftist vigilante on, that's really compelling, especially when so many people see what he did as heroic, honestly. And I will say, like, one of the first things I saw after the day that it happened was a horny chain text about not necessarily the man, but about like the act itself. And I don't know if anyone or if everyone knows what a horny chain text is, but it's like a lot of emojis and like innuendos about a current event. And those exist for any kind of current event now, like the election, et cetera.
I did not have it in my bingo card this morning that we would be talking about horny chain text, but you know what? That's the internet. It's going to bring us these things from time to time. Also, like, it's not just an internet reaction, Rebecca. Like, I think that's also worth acknowledging. Like, you're in New York, you know, not far from where the shooting took place. How much of a gulf would you say there is between the online reaction and the in real life reaction, question mark?
I mean, to me, in my real life, the internet reaction is the real life reaction. I think people are sort of like, they're seeing this as kind of class war, right? It's like the haves and the have-nots. And I think what the real gulf is between how I think people are seeing the media respond to this and how like politicians are responding to it. Because obviously, like, you know, some of that is really understandable. You cannot have people on the Today Show being like, yeah, like, good job. You know, like they can't, you can't have people in media condoning murder. But at the same time, there is this huge gulf. And I think one of the really interesting things that I noticed was how even people that were commenting on really, you know, right-wing commentators saying like, even they sound out of touch and don't understand the way that their own viewers feel about this, which is like this thing that unites both left and right, that are just so angry at the billionaire class and the way that our healthcare system is run.
I think that's an important point. Like, and look, we are also in media here, so I am going to take a moment to say we also don't condone murder, and like that is the way that we are going to talk about it on this network. That is the way that most, you know, news networks end up covering a story like this one. But Miles, there is something kind of uncomfortable about the reality here, which is like this is a story that can't be divorced from the anger that Americans feel towards their healthcare system and towards a class of wealthy people who are running that system. I think it's important to say also, like, the suspect is a young white man. I don't think we'd be having the same conversation the same way if he was a different race. I think that's a worthwhile thing to point out. But given all of this, what do you make of the gulf between the way that the internet talks about this and the way the media companies, you know, because of journalistic standards and practices, have to talk about it in a different kind of way?
Yeah, you do have to be really careful as a journalist. And what's so interesting is, as you know, Rebecca mentioned, like, this is sort of one of the rare bipartisan issues in American life. The fact that there is, the fact that there is sort of broad consensus that, you know, our healthcare insurance system is a scam is really powerful. I think one of the things you like kind of can do and can point to in the media are people who start digging up sort of, you know, the real data about this stuff. You know, one of the things that went around right after the shooting was, you know, a graph showing how United Healthcare, you know, who Brian Thompson was the CEO of, you know, denied almost a third of, you know, these claims from individual accounts for in-network services, denying like a third of those claims. And that's about twice the industry average. And that's just insane. And I think that was something that did get through to, you know, the larger population. That's something that's that's a hard data. That's hard data. That's hard numbers. That is different from, doing the fan cams, doing the heart emoji edits of this shooter. That's something that I think did penetrate, and I think is coming up in the media, thankfully, and I think will be part of the conversation. There is a really obviously serious conversation to be had about the problems of this system, and you can't really glamorize this guy for bringing that to the fore, but as someone in media, you can talk about that, and I think we should be talking about it because we just had a circus of an election where that really wasn't an issue at all. I don't remember either candidate even talking about healthcare or the media talking about it for that matter.
I did notice there's a robust network of YouTube videos. I've seen quite a few sort of Twitter posts about kind of breaking down the United Healthcare data. That's the stuff that you're just talking about there. Is just giving a larger context of what is this company sort of engaging in and how that is kind of interacting with people. But also United Health Group had to turn off comments on its LinkedIn post about Brian Thompson's death because thousands of people were liking and hearting it, and also they had to turn off the comments on Facebook because 24 hours after the shooting, it had something like 36,000 laugh reactions because, again, that is the internet in real life sort of existing maybe in slightly different terrains. Miles, there is a lot of speculation about the motive, right? We sort of heard little bits and pieces here and there, but we haven't. He's not. We don't have the full manifesto that this person, that this shooter had maybe written. But the internet seems to have a very clear read. How do you make sense of that reaction to this death, and I guess the clarity of vision that people seem to have projected onto this killer?
Yeah, I think what you would see was that to compare it to the attempted Trump assassination in July, right? This was a kid who took a shot at Trump, and it was totally bewildering in the moment. As soon as you got a sense of his digital footprint, it didn't really help to put together the pieces. We still don't really get why he did that. Whereas, before we got any more information about this shooter targeting the CEO of a health insurance company, that was an immediately legible act in a political sense. And it allowed you to immediately assume his reasons for doing that. Because the industry is so hated, and because people's frustration and resentment about the industry is so widespread, and millions of people have either been affected by it or had a family member affected by it, that made sense to people, and it was very easy to just glom onto him as having certain ideals. I think, again, as I said earlier, it's going to get more confusing because I think a lot of people pictured him as maybe someone who was underprivileged and underserved, and it's turning out that he grew up quite wealthy. He went to an Ivy League school. He had seemingly every advantage, and we're going to find out, hopefully, where he went wrong. But that's confusing for a lot of people because I think it's weird, for someone to throw that all away for this kind of act. So I don't know what we're going to find out, but I think the picture is just going to get more complicated, and it's not going to be fun for people anymore to kind of cast him as this outlaw hero.
Yeah, I can't stress enough how much this story is still unfolding, and we are learning all kinds of things, as we even have this conversation. Rebecca, I want to maybe close on this. I think there is something that is connected in terms of this story and the submersible story from last year, and the stories about the whales attacking the yachts. The internet seems to have a desperation for some kind of outlet to talk about class. And Zainab Tufekci wrote this really excellent piece in the New York Times about saying there's something really troubling about this reaction, something really troubling about the reaction to murder, and the reason it's troubling is because it kind of indicates an undercurrent of powerlessness and a deep sort of alienation. And how does that sit with you? The idea that this is some kind of sign of social decay playing out on the internet as jokes.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think people are so desperate for a platform to talk about the rage that they feel in this country with these systems that we have, in a way that they'll be heard. And I think the way that they're heard is through like this kind of nihilistic irony. And the fact that like this is the thing that is bonding people on the left and on the right who are, struggling working class people is really powerful. And to me, it kind of reveals that maybe we need an ideological spectrum that is more about like how like nihilistic and black pill and like hungry for revolution you are, because I think like Miles said, like this was not even a part of the discussion in the election. Everyone, like the media kind of painted this out to be a thing of like wokeness and anti-wokeness, but there is another current of, regular American feeling and rage that is nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with like material conditions and the greed of the billionaire class. And I think like this is one way that the people are being heard,
So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the idea of this expression of nihilistic rage and not having anywhere else to go. I think the story is not going to stop anytime soon. We're going to come back to this. I got to leave it there for now. But Miles, Rebecca, I really appreciate your time and your insight. I feel like I understand it a little bit better now. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. Rebecca Jennings is a senior correspondent at Vox who covers internet culture. She's in Brooklyn. Miles Klee is a reporter for Rolling Stone. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, if you look at the top movies at the box office this past weekend, you might be surprised to see the top performing movies because, yes, the usual suspects are there. Moana 2 and Wicked and Gladiator 2. But right behind them is a movie that maybe you didn't expect.
Now you need to tell me what your plan is to save the world.
We're not meant to save the world. We're meant to leave it. And this is the mission we were trained for.
I've got kids, Professor.
Get out there and save them.
You have no idea when you're coming back.
I'm coming back.
Look, I'm going to cry just listening to that. That is a bit of Interstellar. That is a movie that came out in 2014. It is a movie that is directed by Christopher Nolan. It has Matthew McConaughey, Jessica Chastain. Also, not a movie that necessarily did that well when it came out in 2014, but also last weekend released again for its 10th anniversary, and it came in at number 5 at the box office, even though it's playing at like 165 screens across North America. For context, Moana is something like 4,000 screens. So there's clearly a pull towards seeing Interstellar on its 10th anniversary. What gives? How did we even get there? Bilge Ebiri is here. Bilge, why are people watching Interstellar, man? What's going on? Explain this to me.
Well, some of us never stopped watching Interstellar.
That is true and that is real. I hear you. Yes.
I mean, when the film came out in 2014, it did fine. It just didn't quite do as well as a lot of people had hoped it would, because, it's hard to remember now, but, throughout 2014, the film was actually, a lot of Oscar pundits thought it was going to win Best Picture. I mean, over the course of the year, when they were doing their charts and stuff like that, it felt like it was Nolan's time. He had been, quote unquote, snubbed for The Dark Knight. He had not gotten a Best Director nomination for Inception. Space movies had started to become kind of a thing, even though not a single one had ever won Best Picture. So it really felt like Interstellar was going to be that movie that kind of did it. And of course, nobody had seen it yet, right? And once they saw it, they realized it was a very strange movie. It was full of all these like speeches about love being a power, a force more powerful than gravity and all this other stuff. It was much more of a melodrama than people were expecting, because Nolan was seen as kind of this very dark, gritty filmmaker. Yeah. And it did okay financially. It actually did very well overseas, so it did eventually turn a profit, but it didn't really get any of the big Oscar nominations. It kind of, a lot of people felt that it was sort of actually a step back for Nolan at the time.
I do have to say that, like, when you say all these big speeches and big moments about love, I mean, literally the plot of the movie is love bends the function of space-time. Like that's literally what happens in this movie. And you know what? It manages to make you cry. I think we should talk about the sentimentality of this movie, because I think it's important. You wrote a piece for Vulture, and the headline was "Interstellar's most enduring quality is exactly what people used to hate about it." Do you want to talk about that? Because I think it's important to talk about how that sentimentality came back into favor.
Yes, because we got to think about like what life was like in 2014. It was only 10 years ago, but we were a very snarky culture.
We were so ironic back then. Yes,
we were very ironic. The blogs and websites that dominated our lives were very snarky, and there's obviously still a lot of snark, but sentimentality was seen as almost suspect, especially in a film like Interstellar, which was sold to us initially as, oh, we've consulted with Nobel Prize winning scientists and astrophysicists. The science in this movie is really tight. We've crossed all our T's and dotted our I's, and this is like nothing you've ever seen before. And yet, and I mentioned this in my piece, what is the most enduring image from Interstellar? It's the meme of Matthew McConaughey crying his brains out, which is also a scene in the movie where the audience gets really emotional because he's watching video messages from his children over the past like 30 years or something, that he's been in space, and he hasn't heard anything from them and they haven't heard anything from him. So it's, and I think we've embraced sentimentality a bit more. And I think also Nolan as a filmmaker has embraced sentimentality a bit more. I mean, a lot of people cried during Oppenheimer, even though it's not a melodrama, but Oppenheimer is a movie that leaves you kind of a shivering, nervous wreck by the end. And I think there's kind of a continuum there in his career and also in the way we ourselves process like epic movies and things like that.
I first of all, let me proudly join the people who were crying in 2014 and are crying now in 2024 to Interstellar, because that movie has a direct way of like sort of getting at the stuff that matters. And I think like Nolan has only gotten better at addressing that. But even then, it was sort of very clear that this is one of his superpowers. Not one that we'd seen from him at that point, right? Because we sort of got familiar with like the Dark Knight sort of trilogy. And for him to exercise that emotional muscle in a moment where we were maybe not ready for it is something. Do you think we're more ready to receive Nolan at his most sentimental now?
I think so. It's interesting to think because, in 2014, he was like on top of the world. He was like king of Hollywood. And in 2024, he's still on top of the world. He's like king of Hollywood. But over that period, he's made a number of very odd movies. I mean, he doesn't make a ton of movies. He makes a film every, 3 or 4 years or something. But, he does Interstellar. I mean, Dunkirk wasn't as financially successful as The Dark Knight, but was also, his most critically acclaimed movie up until that point. Yeah. And then he does Tenet, which comes out during the pandemic, which is quite possibly the strangest blockbuster ever made by an American filmmaker.
Yes.
Or an American-British filmmaker. And then he comes back with Oppenheimer, which is obviously huge. But all of these films have these very strange personal elements. And before that, we'd never really pegged him as a personal filmmaker. We pegged him as kind of this like, grind set, grim, dark, guy who made very, downcast movies that were, people thought he was a nihilist. This was a thing that a lot of critics called him a nihilist. I never believed that, but I could see how if you looked at the films, you could say, oh yeah, this guy is a total nihilist. And suddenly with Interstellar, which originally was going to be a film directed by Steven Spielberg, which should give you some idea of like the emotionality in it. Yeah.
Yes.
Suddenly Interstellar is about how love will solve literally all of humanity's problems,
in recognition of all of this, I'm going to go to my nearest IMAX and watch Interstellar because one thing that Christopher Nolan doesn't do is he does not make movies for you to watch them at home. None of that business. Get to a theater, enjoy the cathedral that is a movie theater. Bilge, I appreciate you being here. Thank you for your time, man. This has been a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Of course, Bilge Ebiri is a film critic for Vulture in New York. The 10th anniversary re-release of Interstellar is currently screening in select cities across Canada. That is it for the podcast today, but look, before I go, I just want to tell you that we lost one of the greats, truly, one of the greatest literary icons and activists. Nikki Giovanni died. She was 81. If you're not familiar with her work, I think this is a good moment for you to get familiar with her work. I think I first met her poetry when someone just like stuck a copy of Black Feeling, Black Talk, and Black Judgment in my hands. And then it was just this absolutely immediately just like force of a book in my hands. And I'm so grateful to have her work. Also, I should tell you that she was on Q with Tom Power. You should absolutely go find that episode. It is on their podcast feed. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll see you then.